The studio looks like a small city at night. Bright lights, moving shadows, voices calling out cues, cables coiled like rivers on the floor. From the outside, everything feels fast and confident, like it has done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. But backstage, speed doesn't always reach the human heart. Behind a door marked with a piece of tape and a name written in thick black marker, Keanu, there is a pocket of silence that doesn't match the energy outside. Keanu sits in a simple chair, not the kind you'd imagine for a celebrity, just something functional that someone grabbed because it was nearby. He's dressed for television, clean lines, careful choices, but his posture is not performative. His shoulders are slightly forward, as if he's listening to something only he can hear. A production assistant knocks lightly and peeks in with a polite smile that tries not to intrude. 2 minutes, she says, the way people do when they need to stay professional but also want to be kind. Keanu nods. Thank you, he answers, his voice calm, almost gentle, and when the door closes again, the quiet returns like a tide. On the table beside him is a paper cup of tea that has gone lukewarm. There's also a small object in his hand, something the camera won't zoom in on, something the audience will never see clearly if this were real. In this story, it's a smooth, worn token he keeps in his pocket, not expensive, not flashy, but meaningful the way a memory can be meaningful. He rolls it between his fingers like a habit, like a prayer without words. It isn't superstition. It's simply what people do when they're trying to hold steady. Across the hallway, you can hear laughter from a different room. Someone is telling a story, and a few crew members burst into that quick, bright laughter that comes from working long hours together. The sound is warm and normal. It reminds Keanu of something that's easy to forget when you're grieving. The world keeps doing what it does. People keep laughing. People keep planning dinner. People keep making jokes about traffic. It isn't cruel. It's just life continuing. And sometimes the most painful part of loss is realizing that the earth doesn't stop turning because your heart did. He takes a slow breath and glances at his reflection in the mirror. Not the kind of glance someone takes to check if they look handsome, but the kind that asks, silently, "Can you do this?" He's been on shows countless times in his career. He knows how to smile at the right moments and how to make the host feel comfortable. He knows how to turn a simple question into a story that makes the audience lean in. But tonight is different in a way he can't easily explain. Tonight, the topic circling in the back of his mind isn't a movie or a stunt or a funny mistake on set. Tonight, it's a person. In the hallway, another staff member walks by and calls out, "We're ready for you, Keanu." The tone is upbeat. The intention is supportive. Keanu stands slowly, like he's making sure his body is cooperating with his decision. He straightens his jacket, not for vanity, but because he respects the moment. And then he pauses, just for a second, because something catches in his chest, the way it does when you're about to step into a room where everyone expects a version of you that doesn't always exist. The door opens, and the sound from the studio hits like weather. Applause testing, band warming up, the host greeting someone off camera with that practiced charisma that is real and also part of the job. In this fictional story, the host is Jimmy Fallon, and he's in his element, moving with the rhythm of live television. Jimmy is known for being playful, for keeping things light, for turning awkward moments into laughter. But even the most playful people can sense when someone is carrying something heavy. And Jimmy senses it tonight, not as gossip, not as a headline, but as a quiet gravity. A stage manager gestures, counting down with fingers. 5, 4, 3. Keanu steps into position just out of view of the main camera. He hears the introduction begin, the music swelling, the audience clapping in that eager way, like they're celebrating not just the guest, but the idea of a good time. "Please welcome," the host says, and the name lands like a familiar song in a crowded room. Keanu walks out with a small smile, the kind he offers the world because he's learned that kindness can be a form of discipline. The audience cheers and he waves, not too big, not too small. He sits, crosses one leg, nods toward the band. Jimmy leans in with a grin. "It's good to see you, man," he says. "How have you been?" On television, "How have you been?" is usually a simple bridge to the next topic. It's a polite ritual. But sometimes a ritual becomes a doorway, and sometimes a doorway opens into a room you didn't plan to enter. Keanu answers carefully. "I've been okay," he says, and he makes the word okay sound honest, not dramatic. Jimmy watches him, still smiling, but with his eyes doing that thing they do when someone's listening. Okay can mean a lot, Jimmy says, half joking, half true. The audience laughs lightly because the line is relatable. Keanu nods and a short laugh escapes him, soft, brief. For a moment, he looks like the version of himself people expect, calm, grounded, thoughtful. Jimmy starts with safe ground, a new project, a funny behind-the-scenes moment, a question about a stunt. Keanu answers well. He tells a story about timing going wrong on set, about laughing until the crew had to reset the scene. The audience laughs. The band punctuates it with a playful riff. Jimmy leans back, satisfied. This is what late night is supposed to be, fun, human, a little silly. But beneath it all, there is that earlier question still hovering like a quiet cloud. How have you been? The show moves forward, but the heart doesn't always follow the schedule. Between jokes, Jimmy shifts slightly. He doesn't pounce. He doesn't sensationalize. He speaks like someone who has learned at least a little that being a good host isn't just about laughs, it's about not making people feel alone. You know, Jimmy says more softly now, people always say you're one of the kindest guys in this business. You have this steady energy. Where does that come from? The audience quiets because the tone has changed. Not in a scary way, in a respectful way. Keanu looks at Jimmy, then down at his hands. The token is back between his fingers, hidden from the camera by the angle of his palm. His throat tightens in a way that doesn't look dramatic but feels real. He takes a breath. In this fictional story, the words he chooses are not a confession and not a headline. They are simply the truth of being human. I think, he begins slowly, you don't really learn kindness from the good days. You learn it from the days that humble you. Jimmy nods and he doesn't interrupt. He's letting the silence do its job. Silence on live television is risky, but silence in real life is sometimes the only thing that fits. Keanu continues and his voice stays controlled, but something inside it shifts, like a guitar string changing tension. When you lose someone, he says, not naming names, not turning a private life into a public spectacle, you realize how fragile everything is. And you realize that everyone you meet is carrying something you can't see. The audience is still, not because they're waiting for drama, but because they recognize the feeling. Grief is one of the most shared human experiences, and yet it always feels personal, like it belongs only to you. Jimmy's expression softens. He tries a gentle approach, the kind that offers an exit if the guest wants it. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to, Jimmy says, and his voice is sincere. Keanu nods again. He swallows, and for a second he looks toward the audience seats, not focusing on any one person, just looking out at the shape of people, the way a person looks out at the ocean when they're thinking about someone they loved. I don't mind saying this, he replies. I've learned that love doesn't end just because someone is gone. It changes shape, but it doesn't end. That's the moment, still in part one, where the story's emotional engine turns on, not with tears yet. Not with breaking down, but with the honest admission that memory is a form of presence. The audience shifts as if collectively leaning in without meaning to. Jimmy, for once, doesn't reach for a joke. He doesn't try to brighten it too quickly. He simply lets the reality exist on the stage, because sometimes that's what people need. To see that even someone famous can be quiet and hurt and still be standing. Keanu's hand tightens around the small token, and he feels the edges press into his skin. The sensation anchors him. He remembers a detail, something ordinary, something not cinematic, not a tragic montage, just a small, warm image, 2 cups of coffee left on a counter, a shared look across a room, laughter at a line in a movie neither of them even liked that much. Grief doesn't always replay the big moments. Often it replays the small ones because the small ones were where life actually lived. Jimmy asks a careful question, one designed not to invade but to invite. Do you ever feel, Jimmy says, choosing his words, like you're carrying that person with you? Keanu exhales through his nose. His eyes blink once slowly like he's trying to keep a balance. Yeah, he answers. Every day, not in a way that stops me from living, but in a way that reminds me to live better. The band is silent now. The usual late-night rhythm has paused. Somewhere off camera, a producer might be thinking about time, about segments, about the commercial break. But this fictional show, in this fictional moment, allows something else to matter more than timing. It allows a human being to speak carefully about love and loss without turning it into entertainment. Keanu's smile appears again, faint but genuine. And I think, he adds, that's where kindness comes from, because if you've been through something that breaks you open, you start to recognize the cracks in others. You stop judging as quickly. You start offering people room. Jimmy nods and the audience murmurs softly, not cheering but acknowledging. The sound is like agreement, like people saying, "We understand." Jimmy clears his throat and leans forward a little. "That's powerful," he says, and then, trying to keep the moment safe rather than heavy, he adds, "And I'm really glad you're here." Keanu looks at him and says, "Me too." Two simple words, but they hold a lot. They hold survival. They hold choice. They hold the effort it takes to show up even when you don't feel strong. The camera cuts to the audience for a second, faces attentive, respectful, then back to the two men on the couch. Jimmy seems like he wants to say more, but he understands that the next step needs to be gentle. As the segment begins to transition, Keanu's gaze drops again and his expression tightens for a fraction of a second. It's not breakdown yet. It's the moment right before emotion rises, when you feel it gathering like water behind a dam. He adjusts his posture like he's preparing to continue, like he's trying to keep his voice steady if the conversation goes further. Jimmy turns slightly, ready to move the show along, but he also keeps the door open, because he can sense there's more behind Keanu's words. Not on a cliffhanger of sensational tears, but on a real human threshold. The applause may return, the jokes may return, but something has already shifted. The studio is still a studio. The cameras are still rolling, yet the conversation has become something else, something that could help someone at home feel less alone. After Keanu says, "Love doesn't end just because someone is gone." The studio feels different, like the lights are still bright, the camera is still moving, but the air itself has softened. Jimmy doesn't rush to fill the space. He turns his body slightly toward Keanu, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that says, "I'm here and I'm listening." The audience, too, seems to understand the unspoken rule of the moment. This isn't a place for shouting or turning pain into spectacle. It's a place for quiet attention. Jimmy clears his throat and his voice is gentle. "I don't want to pry," he says, "but I also don't want to pretend people don't go through real things. When you're carrying that kind of loss, what helps you get through a day?" It's the kind of question that could easily become a headline in the wrong hands. But Jimmy asks it like a human being, not a reporter hunting for a quote. Keanu looks down at his hands again. He doesn't answer right away, and the pause is long enough that the studio audience, usually trained to laugh and clap on cue, stops performing and simply waits. Keanu's thumb presses lightly against the small token in his palm, as if he's reminding himself he's still on solid ground. "Some days," he says finally, "what helps is something very small, like making coffee, or walking, or being around someone who doesn't need you to be fine." Jimmy nods slowly, his expression steady. "Yeah," Jimmy says, almost under his breath, like he's agreeing as a person, not hosting a show. "The small things can be the whole thing." Keanu's mouth tightens into a faint, grateful smile at that. "Exactly," he says. "People think grief is always crying, always dramatic, but it's also grocery stores. It's also hearing a song you didn't expect. It's also waking up and forgetting for 1 second and then remembering all over again." He says it plainly without chasing the emotion, and that honesty makes the audience even quieter. Jimmy shifts the conversation carefully, as if he's walking through a room where something precious is sitting on a table and he doesn't want to knock it over. "Do you ever worry," he asks, "that talking about someone you loved on camera in public makes it feel like you're giving them away?" Keanu's eyes lift. He looks at Jimmy with something like surprise, as if the question hits a truth most people don't articulate. "Yeah," he admits, and his voice drops slightly. "I do worry about that." He takes a breath. "Because some things feel private, sacred, and I think the world can be loud. It can turn a person into a story." Jimmy's face changes. He's still warm, but more serious than viewers usually see. "I don't want to do that," he says. "Not here." Keanu nods once, and that nod carries relief. "I know," he replies, "and I appreciate it." He pauses again, and when he speaks next, his words sound like they've been prepared by life, not by a publicist. "I think the best way to honor someone is not to talk about them in a big way. It's to live in a way they would recognize." Jimmy leans back slightly, taking that in. "That's beautiful," he says, and for once he doesn't follow it with a joke. The band remains silent, letting the moment breathe. Keanu continues, more confident now, like he's found a safe path to speak without turning his private grief into entertainment. "There's a difference," he says, "between sharing and performing. I never want to perform it. But if sharing helps someone else feel less alone, then maybe it's worth being honest in a careful way. A small murmur runs through the audience, agreement, not excitement. Jimmy nods. A careful way, he repeats. That's the right phrase. Keanu's gaze drifts briefly toward the audience, and his expression suggests he's thinking about people at home watching in their living rooms, maybe late at night, maybe with the TV volume low so they don't wake anyone. When people see someone on a screen, Keanu says, they assume you're protected, like fame is armor, but it's not. You still lose people, you still have empty chairs, you still have birthdays that hurt, you still have days where the world feels wrong. Jimmy's eyes soften. Yeah, he says quietly, yeah. The conversation, though emotional, doesn't stay stuck in sorrow. Jimmy is careful to guide it toward something supportive. So what does living in a way they would recognize look like? He asks. What does that mean for you? Keanu exhales, the kind of breath that's half laugh, half surrender. It means trying, he says. It means answering the phone when you don't feel like talking. It means showing up for friends. It means being patient with strangers. And honestly, this is going to sound simple. It means not letting bitterness become your personality. Jimmy gives a small smile. That's not simple, he says. That's hard. Keanu nods. It is, he agrees, and I fail at it sometimes, but the goal matters. He pauses, and his fingers stop moving around the token for the first time. Because if someone you love is gone and you let the world turn you cruel, then you lose more than a person. You lose yourself. For a moment, the studio is still enough that you can almost hear the cameras breathing. Jimmy swallows and looks down, then back up. He seems to make a decision, one that keeps the moment honest but safe. Can I ask you something? Jimmy says, and you can absolutely say no. Keanu's eyebrows lift slightly. Okay, he says. Jimmy asks carefully, when you think of them, when you remember them, what's the first image that comes to mind? Not the sad part, the real part. Keanu's eyes blink slower now, as if the question pulls a photograph from a drawer he doesn't open often. He doesn't answer immediately. His jaw shifts once and he presses his lips together. When he finally speaks, his voice is softer. A kitchen, he says. Not a fancy one, just a normal kitchen, morning light coming in. He looks down as if he can see it on the floor in front of him. And she's barefoot, she's making something, nothing complicated. Toast, maybe. And she's humming, kind of off-key, like she doesn't care if it's perfect. The audience lets out a tiny sound, an involuntary, tender reaction. Jimmy smiles gently. That's a good image, Jimmy says. Keanu nods and his eyes look shinier now, though he's not crying yet. It is, he says, because it's not a tragedy, it's just life, and that's what I miss, not the grand stuff, the ordinary. Jimmy's voice is soft. What was she like? He asks, and again, it's not framed like a demand, more like an invitation to share only what feels right. Keanu exhales. She was brave, he says, but not in a loud way, brave in the way she loved people, brave in the way she kept going even when things were hard. He pauses. And she had this way of making you feel like you were a burden, like your worst day didn't make you unlovable. The sentence lands heavily because so many people fear exactly that their sadness makes them too much. Jimmy nods, and his eyes flick toward the audience for a second, as if he knows the viewers at home might be feeling seen. Keanu's voice lowers further. I think, he says, that's why I keep trying to be kind, because she was kind, not performative kindness, real kindness, the kind that happens when no one is watching. Jimmy sits very still. Thank you for sharing that, he says, seriously. Keanu gives a small nod, but the emotion is closer now, like it's standing behind his ribs, waiting. Jimmy senses it too. He doesn't push. He starts to pivot gently, mentioning Keanu's work, a project, a lighter topic, a safe bridge back. But the tone can't fully return to comedy because something honest has already been said, and you can't unsay it. As Jimmy transitions, Keanu tries to smile, and he does, briefly. Yet the smile is threaded with something else. The effort of holding himself together on camera while his mind is still in that morning kitchen with the sunlight and the off-key humming. The segment moves toward a commercial break. Jimmy turns to the camera and does the usual line, "We'll be right back with more." But his voice is a touch calmer than normal. The applause sign lights up and the audience claps, though not wildly. It's a supportive clap, like people are saying, "We're with you." The moment the cameras cut to break, the stage energy shifts again. Crew members move quickly. Someone adjusts a mic. The band members relax their shoulders. Jimmy turns slightly toward Keanu and speaks off mic, his face kind. "You okay?" he asks quietly. Keanu nods, but it's not a quick nod. It's the kind of nod someone gives when okay is a complicated word. "Yeah," he says, and then corrects himself. "I'm here." Jimmy pats him lightly on the arm, brief, respectful, and stands up to check something with a producer. Keanu remains seated, looking down at his hands, breathing carefully. He is not trying to create a viral moment. He's trying to survive the simple act of speaking about love in front of strangers. And in that short space, between the public segment and whatever comes next, Keanu's eyes close for half a second, like he's collecting himself. The story is moving toward the emotional peak, but it hasn't exploded into tears yet. It's still restrained, still human, still controlled by the one rule that matters most: dignity. The commercial break is only a few minutes in real television time, but in a person's internal world, a few minutes can feel like an entire chapter. The studio continues to hum with professional efficiency. A makeup artist steps forward to dab shine from Jimmy's forehead. Someone adjusts Keanu's microphone wire. A stagehand kneels briefly to fix the edge of a rug that has shifted under the couch. Everything is ordinary. That ordinariness is strangely comforting, because grief has a way of making you feel like you've fallen out of the normal world. Watching people do normal tasks can feel like proof that you're still on the planet. Keanu sits with his hands folded, the small token now tucked away, his fingers resting empty against each other. He stares at a point on the floor, not because he's lost, but because he's trying not to be pulled under by memory. Jimmy returns to the couch, not as a host now, but as a person taking advantage of the off-camera moment. He leans in slightly. "We can steer away from it," Jimmy says quietly. "We can just do movie stuff, fun stuff, whatever you want." Keanu looks up, and for a moment you can see the decision forming behind his eyes. It's the decision many people face when their pain is visible. Do I hide it and protect myself, or do I tell the truth and risk being misunderstood? The modern world is not always gentle with truth, especially when truth is emotional. It can be clipped, framed, turned into commentary. Keanu knows that. In this fictional story, he has lived long enough in public to understand what people do with private moments. "I don't want it to become a thing," Keanu says carefully. "I don't want anyone to twist it." Jimmy nods firmly. "I won't," he says, "I promise." Keanu holds Jimmy's gaze for a second, measuring whether the promise is real. Jimmy's eyes don't flinch. "Okay," Keanu says, and his voice is steady but not hard. "Then maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay to say something that matters." Jimmy's face softens. "You're in control," he says. "We follow you." Keanu nods again, and you can see his shoulders drop slightly, like his body has been holding tension it didn't need to hold. Off to the side, a producer watches the interaction with a concerned expression. Jimmy gestures subtly to the producer, a small motion that communicates, "Keep it respectful. No cheap music cues. No zooming in for tears. Let it be what it is." The producer nods. The break continues. Audience members shift in their seats. Some whisper quietly to each other, not gossiping but processing. One person in the audience wipes their eye and then quickly stops, embarrassed to be seen. Another person reaches for a partner's hand. These details aren't dramatic. They're real, the quiet ways humans respond to human vulnerability. Keanu takes a sip of water offered by a crew member. He thanks them. The courtesy is automatic for him, but it also matters. When grief makes you feel powerless, manners can be a tiny way to remain yourself. The stage manager signals that they're coming back from break soon. Jimmy straightens his jacket and bounces his shoulders once, a familiar pre-show ritual. He looks at Keanu again, offering one last chance to redirect the conversation into safer, lighter territory. "We can do the goofy game we planned," Jimmy says, smiling lightly. "Or we can just talk." Keanu's lips curl into a small smile at the idea of a goofy game. For a moment, the heaviness lifts a fraction. "Maybe after," Keanu says. "Let's talk first." Jimmy nods. The countdown begins again. 3, 2, 1. The band plays the return music, the applause sign lights up, and the audience claps as the cameras roll. Jimmy faces the main camera and does the upbeat return line, but his voice remains grounded. Then he turns back to Keanu, and the shift is subtle. He doesn't reopen the door with something invasive. He opens it with something universal. "We were talking about kindness," Jimmy says, "and about how people carry things we can't see." He pauses. "I think that's something a lot of folks needed to hear." Keanu nods. The camera catches his expression, calm but with a carefulness in his eyes. "I hope so," he says, "because I know what it's like to feel like you're the only person in the world who's hurting." Jimmy leans forward slightly. "A lot of people watching have lost someone," Jimmy says, "or they're afraid of losing someone, and they don't know what to do with that fear." He chooses his words with precision. "When you've been through something that big, what do you wish people had said to you?" Keanu breathes in slowly. The question lands deep. He stares at Jimmy for a moment as if he's seeing not a host but a friend asking for something honest. "I wish," Keanu says, "people had understood that there's nothing you can say that fixes it, and that's okay." He pauses. "I don't need fixing. I needed company. I needed someone who could sit with me without trying to make it smaller." Jimmy nods, visibly moved. "Yeah," he says quietly, "just being there." Keanu's voice gains a little strength. "Exactly," he says, "and I wish people knew that bringing up the person's name doesn't hurt me. Pretending they didn't exist hurts more." He swallows. "Because if you loved someone, you don't want them erased from the room just because they're not physically in it." The audience is silent again. Even the band members look still, attentive. Keanu continues, the words coming from a place that's both painful and clear. "There's this weird thing people do," he says. "They avoid the topic because they're afraid you'll cry, but sometimes crying is just love with nowhere to go." Jimmy's eyes glisten. He blinks and tries to hold his composure because he's on TV, because he's the host, because he doesn't want to make it about himself. But the sincerity is visible. That's a line right there," Jimmy says softly. "That's real." Keanu's mouth twitches with a small, almost apologetic smile, as if he doesn't want to sound like he's delivering a quote. "It's not a line," Keanu says. "It's just what it feels like." Jimmy takes a careful step closer to the emotional edge, but he does it by offering Keanu control. "If you want," Jimmy says, "you can share one thing you want people to remember about the person you loved, and if you don't, we can move on." Keanu looks down. His shoulders lift with an inhale and drop with an exhale. "I'll share something," he says, voice quiet. He turns his head slightly, looking past the cameras, as if speaking to someone absent but present in memory. "She had this laugh," he says. "It wasn't perfect. It was sudden, like it surprised even her." He pauses, and the pause is filled with the image. "And she used to laugh at things other people missed, tiny jokes, weird moments. She had this ability to make the world feel less heavy." Keanu's voice trembles for the first time. It's subtle, like a single thread pulling loose. He clears his throat. Jimmy doesn't speak. He doesn't interrupt. He simply stays still, letting Keanu set the pace. Keanu continues, "And she was the kind of person who would look at you, really look at you, and you felt understood, not judged, not measured." He shakes his head slightly, as if the memory is both sweet and unbearable. "I miss that." A hush spreads through the studio, deeper than before. It's the hush of people recognizing something sacred. The simple fact that love leaves an imprint and absence is not empty, it's full of echoes. Jimmy's voice is barely above a whisper when he speaks. "I'm so sorry," he says, and for once the phrase doesn't feel like a cliché because he doesn't say it to close the topic. He says it to honor it. Keanu nods, but now his eyes are shining in a way that suggests the dam is close to breaking. He tries to smile again, but the muscles in his face don't fully cooperate. "Thank you," he says. I don't talk about it much." Jimmy nods. "I get it," he says. Keanu takes a breath, and that breath wobbles slightly. He looks down and quietly reaches into his pocket, not for dramatic effect, but as if his hand needs a familiar anchor. He doesn't show the token to the camera, he just holds it. His fingers curl around it. His shoulders shift. Jimmy notices and keeps his hands visible, open, non-threatening. It's a small body language thing, but it matters. It tells Keanu, "You are safe here." Keanu's voice lowers. There are nights, he says, when you're fine until you're not, and it can happen anywhere, in a car, in a grocery store, on a set, on a couch on a talk show. He lets out a short breath that sounds like a laugh but is. You don't schedule it. The audience doesn't laugh, they understand. Jimmy nods slowly. No, he agrees, you don't. Keanu sits very still, and his eyes blink faster now, the way they do when tears are close. The emotional peak is approaching, but it's not forced. It's earned, built from careful words and respect. And as Jimmy prepares to respond, the camera holds on Keanu's face for a beat too long, just long enough to show the truth. Sometimes a person's strength is not the absence of tears. Sometimes strength is staying seated in the light anyway. Jimmy senses the emotional pressure rising and does something unusually wise for late-night television. He slows down. He doesn't chase a viral clip. He doesn't heighten the music. He doesn't lean into the spectacle of a famous man crying. Instead, he lowers his voice and asks a question that gives Keanu a place to stand. When it hits you like that, Jimmy says, what do you do? Do you let it happen, or do you try to push it away? Keanu stares at the floor. He takes a breath that seems to catch halfway in his chest. I used to push it away, he admits, because I thought if I let it in, I wouldn't come back out. His voice cracks slightly on the last words. He blinks and his eyes spill over just a little. The first tear is small, almost invisible under studio lights, but it changes everything, not because it's dramatic, but because it's honest. The audience remains quiet. A few people in the front row bring their hands to their faces, not to hide, but to hold themselves together. Jimmy reaches down beside his chair and without ceremony picks up a tissue box from a side table that's always there for makeup or unexpected moments. He sets it gently near Keanu, not shoving it into his hands, not making a performance out of it, just placing it within reach. No pressure, Jimmy says softly. It's here. Keanu nods, his throat working as he tries to speak. Thanks, he says. His voice is small now, like he's speaking from a place deeper than the studio. He takes a tissue, dabs his eyes once, and then holds the tissue loosely as if he doesn't quite know what to do with it. He tries to smile in apology, but Jimmy shakes his head. Don't apologize, Jimmy says. Seriously, don't. Keanu exhales, and the exhale breaks into a quiet laugh that turns into something else. It's just, he starts, then stops. He looks up and his eyes are wet. Under the bright lights, the tears shine, and for a second the world sees not a celebrity but a man remembering someone who mattered. It's just that, Keanu continues. You spend a long time trying to be okay for everyone else. He swallows. And then someone asks one kind question and your body goes, oh. We can stop pretending for a second. Jimmy nods, his own eyes glossy. Yeah, Jimmy says. Yeah. Keanu's hands tremble slightly. He presses them together, tissue caught between his fingers. I don't want people to think I'm broken, he says, the word heavy. Jimmy answers immediately, firm and kind. This isn't broken, Jimmy says. This is love. That sentence lands in the studio like a bell. Not loud, but clear. Keanu's face tightens and another tear slips down. He covers his mouth briefly as if to hold the emotion in place, but it doesn't cooperate. He lowers his hand again. I loved her, he says simply, and his voice shakes. And I still do. The audience stays silent, but it's not an empty silence. It's a supportive one, thick with empathy. Jimmy's posture remains open, anchored. He doesn't touch Keanu without permission. He doesn't crowd him. He just stays with him. Keanu continues, the words coming in uneven pieces. People sometimes say, you'll move on, he says, and there's no anger in his voice, just exhaustion. And I know what they mean. They mean you'll survive. But it can feel like they're asking you to trade the love in for something else. He shakes his head, tears still present. I don't want to trade it. Jimmy nods. You don't have to, he says. Keanu breathes slower now, trying to regain steadiness. What I've learned, he says, is that you don't move on, you move forward. He emphasizes the second word as if it matters. And the love comes with you. Jimmy repeats it softly, like he's making sure the audience hears it. You move forward, he says, not on. Keanu nods, wiping his cheek with the tissue. Yeah, he says. He takes a moment, then speaks again, more clearly. And sometimes moving forward looks like laughing at something stupid, and sometimes it looks like crying on a couch on TV. He lets out a small, self-aware breath. I didn't plan this. Jimmy's mouth curves into a gentle smile, not a comedic one, but a human one. It's okay, Jimmy says. It's okay. Keanu looks toward the audience and seems to realize he's being watched by people who might be hurting too. His voice steadies with purpose. If someone is watching, he says, and they've lost someone, I just want to say you're not weak because it still hurts. You're not failing because it still shows up. He pauses, blinking through tears. It shows up because it mattered. Jimmy nods and his gaze drops briefly as if he's holding his own emotion. That's important, he says. Keanu continues, and if you feel like you have to be over it to be acceptable, that's not true. He takes a breath. Take your time, talk to someone you trust, and if you need professional help, there's no shame in that. He says it plainly, not like an advertisement, but like a person who understands that grief can become too heavy to carry alone. The studio remains still. Jimmy glances at the camera, and in this fictional story, he chooses to support the message without turning it into a PSA. That's real, Jimmy says quietly, and thank you for saying it. Keanu's tears slow. He wipes once more and then holds the tissue in his lap. His breathing steadies. He looks at Jimmy and gives a small nod of gratitude that says more than words can. Thank you for being careful, Keanu says, not making it a show. Jimmy's response is immediate. You're a person, Jimmy says, not a segment. A soft ripple of applause starts. Someone claps gently, then others join, but it's not wild or loud. It's respectful. Jimmy lifts one hand, palm down, subtly calming the room, keeping the energy gentle. The applause fades into quiet again. Keanu takes one more breath and manages a faint smile. Okay, he says, voice calmer. Okay. Jimmy nods, relieved not because the emotion is gone, but because Keanu looks steadier. Okay, Jimmy repeats. We're here. The moment lingers, and then Jimmy does what good hosts do after a heavy truth. He doesn't erase it with comedy, but he gives the room a path forward. Can I ask you one lighter thing? Jimmy says, careful. That still connects to what you said, about kindness and the small things. Keanu nods. Yeah, he says. Jimmy smiles gently. What's one small thing, like, truly small, that made you feel human again after a hard day? Keanu thinks, the question is simple enough to be safe, but meaningful enough not to feel like a sudden tonal whiplash. A friend showing up, Keanu says. No speech, no advice, just sitting with me. He pauses and a slight smile returns. And honestly, dogs help. The audience lets out a quiet laugh. Relief laughter, grateful laughter. Jimmy smiles. Dogs are the best therapy, he says. Keanu nods. They are, he agrees. The emotional peak has passed, but the sincerity remains. Keanu's eyes are still wet, but he's present. He's not performing strength. He's simply continuing. And in a world that often demands people either be entertaining or be silent, this moment, fictional as it is, offers a third option. Be honest and be treated with respect. After the laughter about dogs fades, Jimmy keeps the conversation warm and grounded. He doesn't snap back into high-energy comedy. He stays in a tone that fits the moment, a tone that allows hope without pretending grief is solved. You said something earlier, Jimmy says, about not letting bitterness become your personality. He pauses. How do you actually do that, like practically, day to day? Keanu leans back slightly, as if he's relieved to be asked something actionable rather than emotionally exposing. He rubs his thumb against the tissue once, then sets the tissue aside, keeping his hands open in his lap. I try to watch my thoughts, he says, not in a fake positive way, more like noticing when my mind starts telling a story that everyone is bad, everything is pointless, nothing matters. Jimmy nods. That spiral, he says. Keanu nods back. Yeah, Keanu says, because if you've lost someone, the world can start to look like a place that only takes, and then you start expecting loss everywhere. He pauses. So sometimes I do something small on purpose, like holding a door or thanking someone or tipping more than usual if I can, not because it fixes anything, but because it reminds me there's still good happening, through me if I choose it. Jimmy looks at him thoughtfully. So you're participating in the good, Jimmy says. Keanu's lips curve faintly. I guess, he says, and I'm also letting other people participate in it, because sometimes you think you have to carry everything alone. He glances toward the audience again. But you don't. Jimmy shifts in his seat and asks another careful question. Do you think, he says, That the person you loved would want you to be happy. Keanu's eyes flicker with emotion again, but this time it's softer, less like a wave, more like a tide. I think, Keanu says slowly, they would want me to be alive, fully alive. He nods as he speaks, as if convincing himself. Not smiling every minute, not pretending, but alive, eating food that tastes good, calling friends, making things, laughing when something is funny. Jimmy smiles gently. That's a good definition, he says, fully alive. Keanu breathes out and the studio feels a little lighter, not because grief is gone, but because a door has opened toward living. I used to feel guilty, Keanu admits. When I laughed, like, how can I laugh if she's not here? He shakes his head. But then I realized laughing doesn't betray love, it honors it, because love was never meant to turn you into stone. Jimmy nods, clearly struck by the phrase. Love was never meant to turn you into stone, he repeats quietly, almost to himself. Keanu's voice steadies further. And I think people need to hear that, he says. Because grief can make you punish yourself for surviving. You start thinking, if I feel okay today, does that mean I didn't love them enough? He looks at Jimmy. That's not true. Jimmy turns slightly toward the camera in a way that includes viewers at home. That's not true, Jimmy echoes softly. Keanu continues, the pain proves love, and the moments of peace, those are not betrayal, they're mercy. He pauses, you're allowed mercy. The audience is quiet again, but now it's a quieter kind of quiet, less heavy, more attentive. Jimmy lets the silence sit for a moment, then offers a gentle pivot. You've also been known for doing a lot of kind things quietly, Jimmy says, and people find out later and it inspires them. He smiles. Do you ever wish people didn't find out? Keanu gives a small, genuine laugh, his first fully relaxed laugh in the story. Yes, he says, because if you do something kind, it shouldn't be a scoreboard. Jimmy laughs softly. Right. Keanu shrugs, still smiling. But if it inspires someone else, he says, then maybe it's okay, as long as it doesn't become a brand. He looks down briefly, thoughtful. Kindness isn't a brand, it's a habit. Jimmy nods. A habit, he repeats. Keanu grows serious again, but not sad, more purposeful. If you want to honor someone you lost, he says, choose one thing about them that was good, one thing, and practice it. He holds up one finger as if offering a simple rule. If they were patient, practice patience. If they were generous, practice generosity. If they were honest, practice honesty. It doesn't bring them back, but it keeps them active in the world. Jimmy's expression changes. That's powerful, he says, keeping them active in the world. Keanu nods, because memory isn't just replay, he says. Memory can be action. The audience begins to react again, soft claps, a few nodding heads, someone whispering, wow, without meaning to. Jimmy smiles, but he also maintains the respect of the moment. I think a lot of people needed that, he says. Keanu takes a breath and looks more settled now. The tears earlier haven't disappeared, they've simply found their place. They've become part of the conversation rather than a disruption. I hope, Keanu says, that if someone is watching and they feel alone, they'll remember it's okay to reach out. He pauses. It's okay to say, I'm not doing great. You don't need the perfect words. Jimmy nods and his voice turns gently encouraging. And if you're watching and you have a friend who's grieving, Jimmy adds, text them, call them, show up. You don't need a speech. Keanu nods appreciatively at Jimmy's addition. Yeah, he says, show up. Jimmy glances to the side, likely toward a producer, then back to Keanu with a small smile that signals a return to lighter territory, carefully. Okay, Jimmy says. We're going to do something fun after this, nothing crazy, just a quick little thing. But before we do, I want to say thank you, because that was real. Keanu nods and his smile is modest. Thanks for letting it be real, he says. They do a short, light segment in this fictional story, something harmless and easy, a simple game with funny answers or a playful prompt. The audience laughs again, and this time the laughter doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like balance, like the show is demonstrating something important. A person can cry and then they can laugh. Both can be true. Both can exist in one evening. As the segment ends, Jimmy closes with warmth. Keanu Reeves, everybody, he says, and the audience cheers louder now, not because they've forgotten the earlier moment, but because they've witnessed something rare, a public conversation handled with care. Keanu stands, shakes Jimmy's hand, and they share a brief, respectful hug, quick, not theatrical. The applause continues as Keanu waves to the crowd and walks off stage. The camera stays on Jimmy for the final seconds of the segment, but you can tell Jimmy is still affected. He looks into the camera with a softness that isn't typical for late night. "We'll be right back," he says, and the show moves on. But Keanu's night doesn't end when the camera cuts.